Have you ever reached the middle of your story's draft and just felt completely stuck? Today, I'm going to show you how understanding one simple concept, the midpoint, can transform your entire second act. And the midpoint probably isn't what you think it is. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to craft your second act from the 25% mark all the way to 75% around either a false victory or a false defeat midpoint. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I am Rochelle. I have been a professional freelance editor for the past 10 years, working on novels of many varieties. I've written 7 of my own, and today we are focusing on the crucial midpoint of your story. It affects everything from the break into 2 moment all the way back at the 20 to 25% moment until break into 3 at 75%. If you are familiar with Save the Cat, that's what I'm using. If not, don't worry. We're going to get into a bit of a review before we talk about the midpoint specifically. Whether you are a pantser or a plotter, understanding the 2 different types of midpoint will help you create a more compelling emotional journey for your characters, as well as for your reader. Your reader might not know what's coming next, but your story is still hitting every expectation they have of what a story will do to their own emotions. It's inevitable and surprising all at once. Before we get into the midpoint specifically, let's go ahead and talk about Save the Cat. Save the Cat is one of many story structures. This one was created by Blake Snyder, and Jessica Brody in recent years has brought it into more modern times with YA novels. In the Save the Cat beat sheet, there are 15 key points. The ones that we'll focus on today are the 3 in the middle: fun and games, midpoint, and bad guys close in. Generally speaking, fun and games covers starting from about 20 to 25% all the way until the midpoint at 50%. That is a long time for one beat. The midpoint is one moment, from a few hundred to a few thousand words, and then from the midpoint to break into 3 is between about 50 and 75%. All of that is the beat bad guys close in. How are you supposed to know what to do with that much story? Let's first go to a quote from Jessica Brody. She wrote a book called Save the Cat Writes a Young Adult Novel, updating the system for a more modern young adult approach, which is where my specialty is. The Fun and Games delivers on the promise of the premise of the novel and shows us how your hero is faring in the new Act 2 world. Either they're having fun or they're floundering. That little parenthetical statement is going to be key, but we'll get there. Note that Brody says it delivers on the promise of the premise. What that means is whatever we came for in the story, we're likely to get in the Fun and Games, in the new Act 2 world, whether it's 2 characters falling in love or the new world on the other side of a wardrobe. However, 25 to 30% of a story is a lot of words. In a 100,000 word book, you could have 30,000 words just in this Fun and Games beat. So how do you write those words? We'll get there, but first, let's look at the second half of Act 2, Bad Guys Close In. Again, a quote from Jessica Brody in Save the Cat Writes as a Young Adult Novel. Bad Guys Close In provides a place for your hero to rebound after a false defeat midpoint or a fall down after a false victory midpoint, all while the conflict, stakes, and tension are mounting and internal bad guys and flaws are closing in. Something changed in that midpoint that separates Fun and Games from Bad Guys Close In. Often, a ticking clock is introduced or intensified, the stakes are higher, and the action is more intense. It's the part of our book that the hero is trying to learn the truth of their theme and come to terms with who they need to be in order to survive the plot, win the girl, or whatever it is their goal is. Now let's go ahead and define the midpoint. The midpoint marks the middle of the novel with either a false defeat or a false victory, while at the same time raising the stakes of the story and shifting the direction of the narrative. Here's the key. Midpoints can be one of 2 things, a false victory or a false defeat. The version you have in your story will tell you not only about that moment, but also the fun and games the bad guys close in and potentially your break into 2 moment. Let's look at how Brody talks about it first. In false victory midpoints, the hero gets something they want, and in false defeats midpoint, they lose something they want. But that word want is exactly why they're both false. Remember, the story is not about what the hero wants, it's about what they need. In Fun and Games, the hero is either having fun or floundering. In Bad Guys Close In, the hero is either rebounding or falling down. The important thing here is the pattern. What goes up must come down, what goes down must come up. If the Fun and Games is actually fun, we should then give our character a false victory at the midpoint before taking it away and Bad Guys Close In. If the fun and games is awful for our hero, we should show them what they think is rock bottom at the midpoint before letting them regroup and kick ass in Bad Guys Close In. Note that the Save the Cat beats are named with the assumption of a false victory, but many stories are actually false defeats. Let's take a look at 2 examples, starting with a false defeat.
Happy Hunger Games!
Let's see how Suzanne Collins masterfully structures Katniss's journey. The fun and games of Katniss's journey in The Hunger Games, the first novel, starts with preparation in the capital, but the focus quickly switches to a literal game. Katniss and 23 other tributes are thrown into an arena with the goal of being the last one alive at the end. This is a downward path for Katniss. She might have signed up for this, but she is floundering in her Act 2 world, and it is certainly not what she would call fun, even if it is the Hunger Games. This moment, the fun and games, ends as she gets stung by tracker jackers. The midpoint happens when she's hallucinating, weak, and ready to die. Peeta saves her life. This is a low point for Katniss, though, because she's already failing at the game she volunteered for, and Peeta having feelings for her solves nothing. Either one or both of them will die. That's how the games work. So then, in Bad Guys Close In, Katniss recovers from the venom, allies herself with Rue, a tribute from a different district, and together they figure out how to play the game to their own strengths. Katniss is no longer in over her head. While more and more tributes are dying, it brings her closer to the inevitable choice of what to do about Peeta. The stakes are higher, but Katniss has recovered from her low moment and started to rebound. She's taken control. Katniss makes no secret from the beginning of the book of her hatred for the world in which she lives. The capital and all it represents is awful to her, and the only thing more repellent is sending her sister off to face this machinery.
I volunteer as tribute!
So Katniss makes this choice confidently. She volunteers as tribute, almost on instinct, but she is immediately out of her element. From the "that is mahogany" moment on the train, hair and makeup, into the games themselves, Katniss might have been willing to take her sister's place, but she wasn't prepared for it. Because Katniss volunteers as tribute, if Suzanne Collins had chosen to make the fun and games easy for her, we would lack dramatic tension. She volunteered for this, it's what she expected, it's not too hard. That's not interesting. However, because she struggles so much in the first act of Act 2, she's able to pull it together in the second half. And the Bad Guys Closing In becomes a background problem when she finally starts taking initiative within the games that have this far beaten her. I won't get into the ending, we don't need to, I won't spoil it, I guess. It's been out for a while, but still. We'll instead switch to look at the false victory. Now, false victories are really common in romance novels. They give us a taste for what the relationship could look like between the leads, then rip it away at the next beat. But it's not the only use for a false victory. Let's go ahead and keep in the same dystopian genre here, and then show how they use a different beat structure to get there. The Giver is considered by some to be the quintessential or the prototype YA dystopian novel. It was a full 15 years earlier than the huge dystopian boom that happened in the mid-2000s. But how does it accomplish its arc? In the fun and games, the main character Jonas has become the receiver of memories. And as he begins to receive these memories, he learns mainly wonderful things at first. Jonas has been given access to a world beyond his own. He gets to experience the color red and snow and more colors as his training continues, because until this point, his world was literally black and white. There are some hints that this is a limited view of the memories he will receive, but for the most part, his trajectory builds up to a false victory. Jonas's midpoint is a smaller victory as he enjoys his new role in wisdom. In a book as short as The Giver, the victory doesn't last long, and The Giver uses Jonas's confidence in the role to begin to introduce him to pain, starting the raised stakes and downward trajectory of the Bad Guys Close In moments. The memories Jonas receives become more and more painful, and at home, the baby his father is caring for isn't showing signs of improvement and might be released. He's beginning to doubt what that means. He thought it was something peaceful. He's beginning to learn that it might be something closer to the euthanasia it actually is. Jonas is sensing urgency about his own decision about whether he should potentially give back the memories and choices to his community. Unlike The Hunger Games, Lois Lowry eases us into the dystopian world where Jonas lives. Everything appears perfect here. It's the welcome, everything is fine moment like The Good Place chooses to open us with. Using this upward trajectory shows toward a false victory was a smart choice here. Jonas himself believes in the power of his community. He thinks everything is fine, so the reader does too. However, despite his personal contentment in his world, Jonas enters the second act unwillingly. He doesn't want to be set apart. He doesn't want to be different. So the fun and games being good initially eases his fear around this new role. This story even has a canonical reason for the upward trajectory. A previous receiver could not handle the negative memory, so the giver intentionally eased the new receiver into his job. This also leads the reader down the path toward the ambiguous ending, when Jonas has to make a scary choice. He's moved away from his belief in his community being perfect the way it is, and he's now willing to do something about it. Because everything starts out fine and he doesn't want things to change at the beginning. Using this path toward a false victory shows his growth the best. Okay, but what about you? Ask yourself, does your hero enter Act 2 willingly or unwillingly? If willingly, fun and games should be hard, like it is for Katniss, and then we get a false defeat midpoint. If it's unwillingly, like Jonas, who didn't want to be a receiver, the fun and games is easier, and the false victory is the midpoint. Look at your current draft. Do you know what type of midpoint you have? Does the rest of Act 2 support it? Another thing that you can do that I love about this method is that you don't need to know the whole thing to figure it out. If you know any of these three things, does your hero enter Act 2 willingly or unwillingly? Is the fun and games fun? Is there a false defeat or a false victory at the midpoint? If you know any of those, you know all of those. You're going to follow this chart. If it goes up first, it will come down. If it goes down first, it will go up. If you note that your character is entering the fun and games willingly and it's easy, and then they have a false defeat, you'll notice that there's a mismatch and it probably isn't reading in terms of pacing and character growth the way you want it to. By ensuring that you're going in the right order, you can help guide the reader to a more satisfying story and more effective character change. Now, Jessica Brody implies that we should make this decision when we're writing our fun and games and let that choice dictate the midpoint and the bad guy's close-in directions. But I personally find it most useful to figure out the midpoint first. I think that's partly because the midpoint is so important to thematic development that I like to start there. And then I also, depending on genre, again, in a romance, it will probably be a victory. But then I know when I start whether I'm building up or tearing down. To me, the midpoint is usually a stronger moment that I'm usually more sure about. Well, I tend to flounder in the rest of Act 2, like a lot of people with the 30,000 word issues. But note that it's possible to work from any one of these beats and use it to place the others. If this helps you, please like and subscribe for more story structure tips. In my next writing video, we're going to be talking about how to create depth in your story world. I look forward to seeing you soon.